Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy Mba to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy Mba is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Kat, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with a little bit about your background. How did you originally get into the type of work you're doing today?
I had been working at the intersection of business meets social justice for about 20 plus years now. I think early in my career, potentially like many of your listeners, I found that I was really drawn to business, but not for the desire to make millions of plastic widgets, but rather for seeing how it could be a force for good. And I think I've always had a very deep passion for social justice and equity. And so finding early in my career that there was an opportunity to marry those passions and create social ventures and social enterprises that could use business as a source for good.
Excellent. And so, let's jump into C-Note. So tell us a little bit about, what was the background to that idea? And I know you did you were in the financial world before, but maybe tell us the story to the lead up to founding C-Note.
Absolutely. So I started getting really interested in finance, specifically the power behind money, who controls it, who doesn't, and really what's fair about any of that. And so spent several years in finance, both traditional finance as well as impact investing. And, the genesis really comes down to a pretty personal story. I was one night looking at some of my own dollars sitting in my bank account and thought to myself, man, I wish I could do something differently. They're sitting in a bank account, not making much interest, and also probably not being put to much good for the world. So I wish there were some alternatives. I had been very familiar with an industry called Cdfis, or Community Development Financial Institutions, who are essentially nonprofit lenders. That's the easiest way to think about Cdfis. They're community lenders. They're responsible for a lot of the small businesses in our communities that we know and love. And I've been familiar with Cdfis for years, so I went to a local Cdfi that I really knew and respected and asked them, could I invest these dollars in them as opposed to just keep it in the bank making nothing? And they said no. They said, sorry, we can't take your money. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I said, oh, okay, you guys must be, flush with cash or have a lot of investment opportunities. And said, no, we would love to take your dollars. We're just not set up to take individual dollars. And that was an aha moment for me. And I think the question I had for myself was, I wonder how many more individuals there are like me who want to see their everyday dollars being put to work for something meaningful. And I wonder how many CDFIs are out there that could use the money, but just can't get access to it for legal and structural reasons. And that really is started down the discovery road that led to C-Note, recognizing that there were millions of us across the country who wanted to invest with our dollars, invest with our conscience, invest with our values, and wanted to do it in a meaningful way. And yet there were so many hurdles to do that. And at the same time, there were tons of nonprofits and really fantastic CDFIs in particular that could use this type of capital to do tremendous work in our communities, specifically in our most underserved communities. And yet we hadn't yet created that natural connection. And so my dear friend and co-founder, Yulia Tarasova, who had worked in Wall Street for years and was a global acumen fellow, shared this passion for using business for social good and recognized as well that this was a really big opportunity to unify those worlds of CDFIs and individual institutional investors. And so we created C-Note as a platform so that anybody can invest with their values to drive transformative change in our communities.
Great. And so maybe walk us through, like, so say I'm a listener or someone who wants to, use your platform, and so what does it look like, and how does it work, and what sort of impact should I expect from using it?
Yeah, I think the first thing to know is that we're open to everybody. So gone are the days where you had to be a millionaire to put your money to work for good. We started the company with our first flagship product, which is on our website right now, and the minimum's $1. And so anybody can get started. And we also reduced friction, and we have no fees, right? So the ability to know that you're putting your money in a place that's transparent, that doesn't have high minimums, but it's 100% impact. So let's take an example. Let's say you have $50 and you want to put it to work for good. You sign up for C-Note. It's pretty much a 3-step process where you kind of create a profile, decide how much, and link your account. And that's it. And what we'll do with that dollars is then we'll invest it in a diversified pool of these community lenders. Where that investment goes are investing in things like women-led businesses, affordable housing, creating schools and low-income communities, and doing also a lot of really exciting environmental work. We actually get to work with some wonderful CDFIs now that work on natural resource projects, carbon sequestration, food deserts, a lot of amazing work that CDFIs have been doing for years. It just was hard for you and I to get to be part of that change and really invest in that important work.
Right. So are the investments, they're not equity investments, like a loan, essentially? That's
right. The actual investment you're making is a loan, and you're putting it on a platform that gives you 90-day access to it. So we've got a liquidity policy or liquidity window to give more flexible access up to 20K. And that's really how we work specifically with individuals. We've also been able to work with some amazing foundations and wealth managers, because we found that it wasn't just individuals that were excited to put their money to work for good. There was quite a few institutions that wanted to do the same, particularly foundations. If you are affiliated with a nonprofit, maybe you serve on a nonprofit board, or maybe you're a donor in a donor advised fund, those are charitable organizations that you expect to be mission aligned. And yet, if you lift up the hood in many of them, they're investing or housing their dollars, whether it's operating capital or investment dollars, in a lot of places and things that often are against what the mission is of the nonprofit itself. And so we've also found a lot of exciting work with asset managers and foundations who want to see their corpus, their investments put to work in a mission-aligned way as well.
Got it. And one of your recent sort of innovations is the Wisdom Fund. Can you talk a little bit about what that is so folks can learn more about that side of the business?
Absolutely. The Wisdom Fund is really exciting for a couple reasons. Number one, it highlights not just our ability to create more and more competitive financial products, so you are earning a really competitive return, but also catalytic impact. Because one of the things we feel strongly with at C-Note is, we can't throw money at the problem and expect things to go away. It really is about working with the communities themselves to problem solve and understand how to better close the wealth gap in this country. And I think the Wisdom Fund's a good example of it. So the Wisdom Fund is a fixed income product. It's an estimated 4% annual return. And 100% of those dollars are invested in women entrepreneurs, specifically women of color. We know that the opportunity for wealth creation and economic independence is dramatically increased when a woman owns her own business. In fact, statistics have shown us that an African-American woman who owns her own business will on average have 10x more wealth than an African-American woman who does not. And so the potential for closing the wealth gap and providing opportunities for economic independence are huge. And yet we also know that only 1 in 23 lending dollars are ever given to women, that women get a disproportionately low amount of dollars to create and grow their businesses. So how do we solve for that? What we've done is create a collaboration of nonprofits across the country of amazing Cdfis who are already working on serving women and women business owners, but want to do it differently and want to do it better, knowing that we're not doing enough. And so we've come together as both a collaboration and as an investment product to help solve for this. So there's a couple unique features of the Wisdom Fund. Number one, I shared 100% of this fixed income instrument goes to women. And so that's something different because there's very few fixed income products that are focused on women, and certainly none that we know of that are focused on investing in women of color and their livelihood. That's one. The second thing we're doing differently is the impact side of it. So instead of creating a product and saying, well, yeah, we hope the women show up and like it, we're actually taking a human-centered design approach. So we're taking it from the women's lens, working with the women entrepreneurs themselves to say, what do you need? When are the points where you need access to capital? And what type of capital is that? And what's the technical assistance or coaching that you would find most helpful? So very much taking it from her lens as we disperse these dollars, as opposed to what is traditionally done in finance, which is we create the product from an investor lens and then just hope people on the other side buy it and create an impact with it. That's another piece that's a bit different about what we're doing. And I'd say the final thing is just the collaborative nature. Everything we do at C-Note, it comes from a co-creative lens. So how do we co-create these products so that they meet the needs of the communities and the investors, not just one piece of the pie?
I love it. And so if I'm a woman of color seeking capital, like what does it look like from the investee side or lendee side, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, you've got, a woman of color who goes to a bank, and we have many of these stories, unfortunately, that she'll go to a traditional bank, she'll get rejected because her loan size is too small, or she's a first-time entrepreneur, or she's a thin file for myriad reasons. And then she'll go to one of our CDFI partners that are part of the Wisdom Fund collaboration, and then she'll get her first loan. But the beauty is she doesn't just get her first loan. She also gets to be part of this larger historic initiative to benchmark how we're working with her, to provide feedback about what she really needs, and also get free technical assistance. So with these loans, she also gets free business coaching to really make sure that she's taking the capital that works for her at the times that work for her, and also to coach around how the business grows.
Got it. Okay, so C-Note is almost like, so there's CDFI partners who are actually doing the lending, and C-Note is the sort of aggregating the capital. Is that kind of what?
That's right. You could see us as the front door partner. You've got amazing CDFIs doing the work to help entrepreneurs, find entrepreneurs, fund entrepreneurs. We're aggregating that capital and providing that technology platform to make it really easy on the investor side to put money through the door, and then really easy on the CDFI side to get access to those funds in a really fair, flexible way.
Got it. Yeah. So who are some of the CDFIs that you work with?
So many. So we actually work across the country in over 37 states right now. So there's a lot. I would say, some that I can highlight include folks like Lift Fund out of Texas that, works in various states and does some tremendous work around actually, not just women, but also working with immigrant and refugee communities as well. I would also say folks like Carolina Small Business in North Carolina doing some really interesting work with historically Black colleges and really looking at the wealth disparity that exists specifically for communities of color. So a lot of innovation happening on the ground, and we want to make sure that those funds are available for them to do that great work and really experiment and try our hardest to close this wealth gap.
Yeah, I love that. So it's almost like from the individual side. So if I'm an individual who's like, I've got 10 grand in my savings account and it's just sitting there and I don't necessarily need it. It's more of like an emergency fund or something. And so I could take it at a quarterly liquidity and a 2.75% return per, I guess, annual. Is that kind of what the target is?
Yep, it's an annual return. And we always say, the best way we reference it is a toe-dipping impact investment. So it's not a bank account. We're not a bank, so we want to be really clear with that. But it is an investment account. It is a kind of toe-dipping investment account where you can make small or large investments with into a really diversified, high-performing group of CDFIs, and know you have access to it, that you don't have to tie it up for 5 years to get it back. And also know that as those dollars are sitting, making that really competitive return, they're going to work for really important things. You are not, those dollars are not investing in CEO salaries or in fossil fuels or in private prisons. In fact, those dollars are going to work to build those schools and community centers and housing that is changing people's lives. So it's a very different way to think about where your money sleeps at night.
Yeah. And so if I'm thinking about the impact side, it's like C Note itself is not choosing to like invest in X or Y business. It's you're sort of helping aggregate the capital for the CDFIs who then invest because they're a CDFI, they're sort of mandated to invest in low income and distressed communities. Is that kind of a simple way to say it, or?
That is, and I will say one of the fun parts about our work is because we get to work with so many CDFIs, we found that there's real opportunity to also do customization. So for example, we work with several nonprofits and foundations who have very specific missions. It could be a mission around education or a mission around the environment or a mission around gender lens investing. And so we can actually channel those investment dollars to make sure that they're supporting that mission, not just in the grant making they're doing, but also in their investing. And that's been a really cool piece of our technology, is to make sure that, our technology works great to diversify your investment, obviously, which is a great risk mitigant, but also to customize. So people who care deeply about a certain theme or a certain issue area can actually invest in it, not just support it philanthropically.
Yeah. And so it's your target, like, who's the ideal customer? Like, obviously individuals, but is it more like, are you looking for more CDFI partners or sort of high net worth folks who want to park money, or what's sort of the type of folks that you're most looking to reach?
Yeah, it's a great question. We love CDFIs, so we're always onboarding CDFIs every month, which has been fantastic to work with. On the investor side, we typically say values-aligned investors. I think important to know about C-Note, what maybe makes us a little bit different is the types of products that we create really have three main components to them. They have competitive returns, easy access, and transformational impact. And so the competitive returns means, you don't have to decide, I really want to invest in women, but, I'm bummed that this is not going to yield me enough to be, a good investment product. So not that trade-off you don't have to make with our products. Easy access, meaning, easy onboarding, whether it's through our website or through your investment advisor. And then transformational impact. To us, as I shared, it's about co-creation, very much listening to what the community needs as opposed to us imagining, what the impact should be or how we're going to move the needle. And so from an investor lens, we tend to work with both individuals who go to our website and invest in the flagship fund. That's really easy to do, sign up in less than 5 minutes. We work with, and those are both accredited and non. So we work with folks, both high net worth investors and college students and grandmothers and teachers and you name it. We've got a really amazing group of folks who have signed up as our members. And then on the institutional side, as I shared, we work with everything from very large asset managers to nonprofits, donor-advised funds, and foundations, all of whom, again, see that they can do more than just, share their mission philanthropically.
Got it. And so just to clarify, none of the investments are sort of riskier venture capital investments. They're just like loans.
No. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, no, we have gone very far to protect investors. I'll just give you some facts, with the caveat always that, you always have to treat, it as an investment. But some of the ways we protect investor dollars or safeguards we put in place are full recourse obligations. So all of our CDFI partners are under full legal obligation to pay investment back, whether or not those end borrowers or those end loans are repaid to them. So there's a full recourse obligation in place to legally get the dollars repaid. We also work with really fantastic CDFIs that are SBA lenders, which means up to 85% of the lending is guaranteed, which puts some nice cushions in for the CDFIs. And we as a whole, as a company, have a loan loss reserve to protect investors, to safeguard investors should there ever be extenuating losses. So on our flagship fund, and this is all on our website, we put several things in place to protect your dollars. But the thing that I always like to highlight, even though everyone likes to talk about what are you doing to protect risk, keep in mind that this industry has had a very, very impressive track record. Cdfis on average outperformed FDIC institutions in the last recession and ever since. And the portfolio of Cdfis that we work with, the youngest Cdfi has been around for over 18 years. And our Cdfis have not lost one investment dollar since their inception. So I shared some of the ways we protect your dollars, but keep in mind, to your point, the investment is not in these high risk, dubious asset classes. In fact, they're in tried and true Cdfis that have been performing for years.
Great. And I was just checking the quarterly liquidity. This is kind of nerdy stuff for some of the listeners, maybe whatever, Ryan, but just quarterly liquidity up to 10% or 20,000 of your investment. This is great. It's almost like one of those, why didn't somebody else think of this? type things. You'll
like this. So when we first came up with this idea, we did a lot of poking holes. We interviewed tons of Cdfis and spoke with some great industry partners, both investors and Cdfi industry experts, to make sure we were doing and creating this correctly and responsibly. And one of the folks we went to was the SBA, the Small Business Administration, right? Because they've been big supporters of Cdfis for years and again have this strong guarantee program. And when I presented this to the SBA, they literally said to me, we couldn't believe it took someone so long to do this. They were waiting for years for someone to make that natural connection to the Cdfi industry. So we're happy that we've been able to do that.
Yeah, it's great because, I think so, and you probably may have saw this more in your previous jobs, but it feels like so much of impact investing is this idea that I want to have market rate returns, whatever that means, and sort of outsized positive impact. It's just becoming more clear that, and especially, I don't know if have you read the book, Winners Take All? You heard that
Yes,
book?
Yeah. Of course, sure.
Yeah. And just sort of the sort of it's kind of a fantasy to think that we can have all this impact and then all this amazing returns for the wealthy wealth holders. So I'm really excited that there's something like this that's not necessarily you're not trying to pretend like you're going to have a 30x exit and go public from investing in these companies. It's just simple CDFI based loans, which is really critical.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we try to do with our members, with our C-Note clients that we call members, is we really try to be transparent with our members where your dollars are going. So versus what most of us experience, which is a black box, right? You give your money to a financial institution and you hope they don't do bad things, and then you come to learn they probably are doing bad things. On the opposite, if you go to our website, you'll see our blog is entirely focused on showing the type of people and the people that you're investing in, and being really transparent about this money going to communities. When you invest in C-Note, we are not sitting on your dollars. Those dollars are quickly being put to work. And so we also try to make folks think about it and invest thoughtfully because of that.
Yeah, and I'm also very impressed because I think that there's so much around, I have say X amount of money in an IRA or Roth IRA, and I want to put it in, quote unquote, socially responsible, publicly traded equities. But it's you're still getting the most socially responsible you can get in a publicly traded companies like Starbucks or Nike or UPS. It's not really it's not really pushing the envelope on sustainability. And so I like this as an option of almost getting, a lot of it's not quite the returns, but I also like that it's potentially much higher impacts. It's local. I mean, it's not potentially, it is much higher impacts because it's you're not having to put it in the public markets, which impact is so limited. So that's another reason I like this.
Yeah, no, I think you're highlighting something we've seen very much an exciting trend in the industry, which is show us more than public equity, right? I think many of us who want to see our dollars do powerful things know that it doesn't have to stop at just investing in companies with, a positive filter, or companies that are doing no harm, or even companies, public companies that are proactively doing good things. We know that our money can do more in terms of creating direct impact. And so we are one, I hope, of many companies that are coming out to say, let's look at your entire portfolio and recognize that whether it's cash or fixed income, or otherwise, that in its entirety can be put to use in a way that you're proud of and that creates more of the world you want to live in.
So what is the long-term strategy for C Note? And, I saw that you have some angel investors, and so I'm curious, is there an exit, quote unquote, potential for C Note, or are you trying to just be a decently, not necessarily grow to be a gigantic company? Or what's sort of the longer term do you see for C Note?
Yeah, so we're in this to change the industry. I think we want to create a world where sustainable cash and fixed income is the default, right? So when you go to invest your dollars, whether it's in a savings account, whether it's in a 401k, or whether it's in your brokerage investment, that your default option is something that you're proud of. And that is clearly not the world we're living in today. And so we think, starting with the CDFI industry, it is a huge opportunity to provide folks a way that they can still get that great return, but feel really excited that these dollars are going to something that they believe in. So for us, it's not just about a product here, a product there. It's proving that we can do this and do this at scale, and that there is a groundswell of individuals that believe and want to see their dollars put to work in this way.
Yeah. So what are the top 2 to 3 challenges you see? What is keeping you up at night with this work you're doing?
Oh, good question. We think a lot about the next market correction or the next recession. I think for most of it, it's not an if, it's a when. And we also know that any type of economic downturn disproportionately affects communities of color and low-income communities. And so we think a lot about that, a lot about resiliency, and a lot about how we prepare our communities and our nonprofits that we work with for that. So that's certainly something that's really top of mind for us. And that includes natural disasters, right? These are all things that, it's not an if, it's a when. So what can we do to better prepare our communities, and then how can each of us play a role? So that's certainly something we think a lot about. And then we also think about the regulatory environment. I think the world that we want to create is one of much greater transparency. If you ask most individuals, what are the fees on their accounts, they couldn't tell you. And then if they actually go back and look, they're usually shocked, right? And so I just think, what we're trying to advocate for is a financial services industry that is actually a service industry that goes back to the roots of trying to serve and create a more financial health for you, not more profits for the financial firm. And so that's a big challenge. And, the way we approach it is walk the walk in everything we do. And then, definitely if we ever feel like we're not, or, champion those who push back and say, hey, you could be doing better. So I think those are some of the things that we know are big hills to climb, but ones that we're on top of.
Yeah. One of the things I've been struggling with and dealing with over the past few years is just, we've been talking a lot in the B Corp community. I know that you're a certified B Corp as well. So congrats on joining the B Corp community.
Thanks.
Is in the B Corp world, we're all social entrepreneurs. We very deeply care about changing the world. And yet we're also a pretty white, upper middle class group of people who think progressively. And I've been kind of interested in the B Corp world around some of our intentions, and then also are we actually making a difference? And I guess this is sort of the Anand Giridharadas, winners take all piece, and some of the other, sort of conversations I've had with folks in the B Corp community around whiteness and the blind spots that can come with this. And I'm just curious, how do you ensure that whatever you're working on, from my perspective, it sounds fantastic, and I totally support it. And I'm also curious, do the low income or women of color, is it how do you ensure that the product that you're providing is actually benefiting them, rather than it's we're bringing this on the assumption that it's benefiting them. I'm kind of saying.
I do, and I think not only is it the right question to ask, I wish we asked it every day of the year in financial services. So the example I give is the Wisdom Fund. We could have made a lot of assumptions, right? And frankly, even our Cdfis that we've united for the Wisdom Fund, many of which are led by people of color. So we walk the walk in the sense of making sure that our community is representative. The leaders are representative of the community. But however, that's not enough. In our humble opinion, you don't presume you know what someone needs. You need to ask and you need to observe. And this gets back to the human-centered design approach. Instead of sitting in a round table room high on the hill going, I think this is what women need, so let's create this because this is what I read about, we actually go out in the field and do the monitoring, the questioning, the observing, and the prototype. That's the main difference here, is instead of imagining, to your point, what someone may need, it's about actually working with that community to co-create it with them, make them at the centerpiece of what that investment product is going to look like. That's the big difference here.
Yeah. I was talking, do you know Tim Wise, the white anti-racist? He's sort of like been around for many years. I don't know if you've heard of him. He has a book called White Like Me, but I was actually interviewing him this morning for the podcast. And he was saying one thing that he's realized is a lot of like foundations or sort of folks will come into communities of color and be like, we have a 2-year grant that we want to start running, and here's what we've identified. He's like, it might take 2 or 3 years to even have that community trust you, let alone like come to them with a product. And so I think that is such a huge piece that a lot of us miss. A lot of us, meaning many of us white folks, do-gooders, is we sort of come in with this like our intentions are good, and like we like, can't they see that we're trying to help? And I think what it's just like slowing down and like just building trust. So I don't know if it sounds like that's what you're doing as well with your product.
Yeah, and I think that time horizon point is very salient. One of the things I shared earlier, and maybe I can even expand upon, as I said, we have to stop throwing money at the problem. Your example of that grant cycle is a perfect homage to that. We tend to get, let's just call them passion projects. And so you get a certain, issue that's in vogue. And so organizations will pull together money and then literally just throw money at the problem for a couple years until that project is no longer in vogue. And guess what? They switch what they care about and that money dries up. That's not how communities work. And that's not how social justice issues work. To your point, they take years, sometimes generations to correct, right? Or to address. And so one of the reasons we created the Wisdom Fund as a longer term fixed income instrument is so we could get out of that cycle. Is so that we could really look at the heart of the structural and systemic issues that are creating this wealth gap for women, not just the lack of capital. Because if all we did was raise a fund and say, great, everybody invest in women, sure, you get a couple $1 million, several more $1 million are thrown into the communities and great, everybody thinks they win. That is not good enough. And that is not changing statistics that women receive 1 in 23 lending dollars, right? Or the heartbreaking statistics about the lack of wealth in communities of color. So if we're serious about that, if we're serious about changing those statistics and changing the opportunity for intergenerational wealth, then you really need to unpack what we're doing. You need to be bold enough to say, we are failing women, we are failing these communities, and the status quo is unacceptable. So let's all call our baby ugly. Let's unpack what we're doing and then repack it so it actually serves those communities.
Yeah. And do you have maybe an advisory board of women of color? Or I'm always curious, how do we keep this accountability, moving forward or anything like that?
Precisely. Absolutely. It's making sure our advisory board is reflective of our community, the communities we serve, thought leaders, and I would even say what I like to call unexpected entrants. And by that, I mean, often we invite the same 3 types of folks, right? Community members, investors, grant makers. Oftentimes when you get someone unexpected at the table, they can bring really fresh thinking to the problem as well. So that's an exciting opportunity for us to really open the door to people who may not be part of the conversation, but should be.
One of the topics I've asked a lot of guests over the past few months and years actually is, how has the election of Trump shaped your work? And so have you seen, like, I guess CNOTE was formed before in it's been around since 2016 or something?
Yep. So just in the thick of it.
Yep.
Just in the thick of it. Look, I would say it's shaped in a lot of different ways. We went into this knowing that we were facing a historic wealth gap in this country. So we went into this work knowing the problem that we wanted to address and solve, right? And that was pre-Trump. Then you look at this administration and what we see to be a focus on creating more wealth for the currently wealthy as opposed to leveling the playing field. So I think it did a couple things. I think number one, it fueled us even more to do this work. I think number two, I think it has exacerbated a lot of the disparities and chasms that we've already seen. And number three, I think it's also shaken up some of the systems that are in place. For example, the Cdfis fund, which is a federal fund. It's a lot of grant dollars that go to some of the smaller Cdfis and to some innovative projects that existing Cdfis do. And the administration questioned whether or not that was a good source of federal dollars. The good news is Cdfis have bipartisan support. They have been a tremendous job creator and income generator for communities across the country. So the good news is a lot of very smart people came back and pushed back, and the Cdfi fund was actually funded at an even higher limit than before because of that support. But I do think we've seen a lot of, let's just say, policies or sentiments put in place that go against a lot of what we believe in terms of leveling the playing field in this country. On the flip side, I think we've seen a lot of interest around impact investing because of it as well. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Solutions by Sonia Dressler, but Sonia Dressler wrote a great piece talking about the increase in impact investing and intention to invest with your values in the Trump administration within the Trump time period, because there are a lot of folks who just feel disempowered, that they're seeing the wealth gap get bigger right outside their door and feel like, what can I do? How can I make a difference? How can I stand, against this? And so impact investing is certainly one exciting way to do that so that all of us can play a part.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with, the idea that there's been an uptick in impact investing. And I think like even the thesis that, I think the thesis of like, everything's going pretty well. We've got Obama, like things are going great. I think the quote, if there is a benefit to Trump, it's sort of ripped the veil off of our sort of perception of like things being decent. So if there is one benefit, it's that I feel like the Winners Take All book and, Edgar Villanueva wrote Decolonizing Wealth. There's like a lot of books sort of challenging the assumption of like do good impact investing and like philanthropy is the solution, actually challenging that and like making an argument that, we might be part of the problem. And so I don't think those books or those ideas would have even been possible without Trump. If that's like an upside, I don't know. So.
Yeah, we went into this work believing that all of us should play a role, right? So we one of the reasons that we felt so strongly that we needed to democratize impact investing and made sure that our first product was open to absolutely everybody with $1 minimum was because we just deeply believe each of us can play a role in solving this problem. And for far too long, we've relied on government and large foundations, right? That they were going to be the heroes swooping up, putting in the capital into our communities, into the environment to make everything better. And I think we all are kind of over that Pollyanna look at vision of the world. I think many of us go, that certainly hasn't done enough. And so I do think we are in an age of much more empowerment, where each of us go, no, I'm sick of waiting around for someone to come solve this problem. I want to be part of the solution. So I think it's exciting when we see more and more opportunities to do that. And
so who are you watching right now and who's inspiring you? Like, who are you looking to for inspiration in your current work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of the Cdfis that we work with. So, one of the things that we do is just stay on the pulse of what they're hearing in their communities and what they need. For example, the Wisdom Fund, the genesis came out of a group of Cdfis, right, who saw this need. And so that certainly is one of the things that we stay very close to. I think on a more macro level, when I think about, access to capital for women. One of the groups that I'm very proud to be a part of is a group called Closing the Women's Wealth Gap, led by Heather McCullough. And so Heather and her team produced a pretty groundbreaking report on the wealth gap for women. And what she highlights is we've talked a lot about the income gap for women, right? With women making 70 cents or 80 cents to the dollar, right? Depending. But what we don't highlight enough in this country is the wealth gap. How much does that woman own? And if she has an emergency, right? A medical emergency, a car emergency, does she have any savings or any assets to fund that emergency? And so that wealth gap is striking, and even more striking than the income gap. So she's done a brilliant job coalescing an amazing group of organizations across the country around this. So she's someone that we certainly follow and are part of that collaboration. And then I think lastly, the tremendous work in racial equity that's happening. We've been fortunate to be a part of a coalition of African American Cdfis who are doing amazing work planning together a CDFI fund focused on African American-led CDFIs. And so keeping our ear to that and being a part of that so that we can have an honest and authentic conversation about racism in this country and how it needs to be addressed if we're going to be serious about closing the wealth gap.
And is there a book that you most often give as a gift?
That's such a great question. My favorite one to give is a book called The Power of Kindness. That's probably at the root of everything we do at C-Note. I think empathy, compassion, and kindness. Those aren't words that are naturally affiliated with financial services or financial firms, but we do believe could play a major role in sculpting the next generation of financial products. And so understanding what kindness does to us as people, affecting both our emotional and our physical health, I think is really fascinating. So that's one of my favorite books.
Kat, how did you ever work for Charles Schwab? You're too nice.
You're too funny. I will say, back to kindness, I met some absolutely wonderful people at Schwab. I do think Schwab employs some really lovely people. And I do think that they've done some really innovative work over the years. I will also say Schwab, like its peers, many of them are mired in systems that were created 50, 70, 90 years ago. And so we have an opportunity to rethink every piece of that equation, whether that's who gets access to financial products, how your return is generated, who gets to create wealth. I think it's time we picked apart all of those assumptions, and hopefully we're being role models to do that.
Great. So maybe a few more questions here. This is always a good one for folks. What do people never ask you that you wish they did?
That's a good one. One question I like is how did you come to do this work? And it really, I like that one only because it took me years to get to the answer of that. I've always been a believer in social justice ever since I was a little girl, and probably didn't really understand why until many years later, in my soul searching or looking back on my resume. So, a bit about me, I came from a very Argentine family. My mom grew up in Buenos Aires, and me growing up in the middle of Los Angeles in a very Argentine household did a lot for me. It certainly taught me the beauty of living, with two cultures, but it also taught me what it felt like to be discriminated against. And so I think recognizing that not everyone is treated equally in this country, and knowing that my family came here with nothing and really struggled to make it, and that opportunity really is fortuitous, that it's not just given to everybody. Were some real facts of life I think I just inherited and embedded in my psyche over the years, and probably created this passionate desire to see more social justice and access to equitable opportunity in this country. So I think that exposure as a child did a lot to form who I am and why I do this work.
So is it just like a common misperception that Argentinians love red meat, or is that actually is it actually true?
I will say that most of my family does, and I certainly grew up with asados and everything. So I don't think it's a misperception, but certainly there are plenty of vegetarians in Buenos Aires as well. So
fair enough.
Not 100%.
Well, last few questions here. What do you need right now, and how can the listeners help you grow this next economy?
So probably my biggest soapbox right now is moving folks from intention to action. I think so many of us want to see this economy change for the better. I think so many of us want to see business used for a source of good, but it can also fall by the wayside because we're all living very, very busy lives. I mean, some of your listeners as we speak may be typing in their computer or driving their car or, on their road to something else. We all live such active lives that it can be hard to move from our intention to do something to action. So my ask is always to do one commitment, whether it's, open your first account at a local credit union or try a C-Note account or ask your financial advisor what socially responsible investment options they have. Just commit to one action that moves you a bit closer to the world that you're hoping to live with and voting with your dollars. That's my big ask.
Love it. Straight and simple, and it's actionable, as you kind of alluded to. And then how can folks learn more about your work? Maybe contact info, website, any social media folks can follow?
Sure. Yeah. So our website is mycnote.com, mycnote.com. You can certainly play around there. You'll see our flagship fund, which is that 2.75% cash product. You'll also see the Wisdom Fund, fixed income on there. And you'll see just a little bit about how we think. We've got both our blog, which shows so many great stories of the incredible work of our CDFI partners, as well as kind of the origin. So I always invite folks to check us out. And if you want, try us out. And if you've got any questions, part of this is the journey we're all on together to just learn what's right for us. So just know we've got an incredible group of folks that are ready to answer any questions and walk you through some of what we're working on.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very excited to have met you and spoken, because this is a very cool product and you're an amazing person. So thank you for all the work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Ryan.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.